Hello guys. Welcome to Powerpack Wrestling. In the world of professional wrestling, it's common for performers to be assigned a specific role early in their careers, and if they end up in the jobber category, it's often perceived as unlikely for them to eventually reach the main event status. However, there have been instances where wrestlers defied the odds and broke through that glass ceiling. Today, we'll explore some prominent examples of individuals who transitioned from being considered jobbers to achieving main event status in various wrestling promotions. Join us on this journey as we delve deep into the careers of these remarkable wrestlers. Let's start today by discussing a surprising journey to the top in the world of professional wrestling. In 2017, Jinder Mahal, who had long been portrayed as a comedic undercard performer during his time with 3MB, achieved the unthinkable by becoming the WWE Champion. But how did this unexpected turn of events come to pass? It all began with being in the right place at the right time for the Calgary-born star. During the latter half of the 2010s, Vince McMahon aimed to tap into the potentially lucrative Indian market. He scoured his roster for a talent who could serve as a significant homegrown star for that audience. Eventually, McMahon settled on Jinder Mahal. While it's worth noting that Mahal is of Indian descent rather than being Indian himself, he perfectly fit the role McMahon envisioned. The next step was to position Mahal to win the prestigious WWE Championship, no small feat given his history of being treated as an afterthought for years. Mahal had been a consistent jobber in WWE for an extended period, making it all the more shocking when, on the April 18, 2017 episode of SmackDown, he not only inserted himself into a six-pack challenge to determine the number one contender to Randy Orton's WWE title but also emerged victorious. He then squared off against the Viper at the May 21 Backlash event, where he achieved the upset of the century by pinning the champion. Suddenly, Jinder Mahal was at the pinnacle of WWE, a surprising and jarring turn of events. However, his performance in this top role yielded mixed results. To make matters more challenging, after losing the championship to AJ Styles and in the lead up to that year's Survivor Series, Mahal found himself back in his old mid-card position. Fortunately, Jinder Mahal is not the only former 3MB member who experienced a rise from jobber status to superstardom. Just a few years later, in 2020, Drew McIntyre achieved a remarkable transformation. As the year 2020 was beginning, McIntyre, a Scottish wrestler, demonstrated that some positive outcomes could emerge from challenging circumstances. He achieved this after a significant victory in the Royal Rumble in January of that year, setting his sights on the then WWE Champion, Brock Lesnar. This made perfect sense in the context of his career trajectory. However, if the same opportunity had arisen just a few years earlier, it would have seemed out of place. This is because, during his initial run in WWE between 2009 and 2014, he was mostly treated as a wrestler of little significance. One could argue that this was a short-sighted booking strategy, considering his physical appearance and natural charisma. Nevertheless, the situation was as it was, and Drew McIntyre remained relegated to undercard matches week after week. Thankfully, his situation took a turn for the better when he left WWE in the latter part of those years and, after a period of self-reinvention, returned in 2017. This return was accompanied by a notable change in his persona and character, and it became evident that it was a logical decision for WWE management to push him to the forefront. While it took until 2020 for this transformation to come to fruition, not even a global lockdown could hinder McIntyre. He achieved a significant milestone by defeating Brock Lesnar at WrestleMania 36 and winning the WWE title. Subsequently, he spent a significant portion of the year that followed as the top babyface of the Raw brand. However, it was clear that this situation couldn't last indefinitely because the wrestling business is constantly evolving. There would always be someone striving to surpass Drew McIntyre's success. One of the founders of AEW eventually achieved a significant career resurgence, and it was Cody Rhodes, a wrestler who faced considerable challenges during his first WWE run. If we were to rewind a few years and try to explain the career trajectory that the American Nightmare was about to embark on, many people would likely have dismissed it as implausible. This skepticism was partially due to the fact that in the mid-2010s, Cody Rhodes' prospects as a main event star appeared to be in a dire state. This was largely attributed to his portrayal of the Stardust character, one of the most infamously ill-conceived gimmicks created by Vince McMahon. It would be akin to imagining Stone Cold Steve Austin adopting the moniker, Chili McFreeze, and trying to establish himself as a serious threat in the ring. Recognizing that there was no path to rise higher in WWE at the time, Cody, despite his undeniable talents, made a bold decision to leave the company. He embarked on a worldwide journey, which ultimately played a significant role in the formation of All Elite Wrestling (AEW) in 2019. However, by 2022, some poorly executed promos and questionable storylines had caused Cody's time in AEW to lose some of its initial appeal. This realization prompted him to understand that to stay relevant, he needed to make a surprising return to his first home in the industry, WWE. This unexpected move took place at WrestleMania 38 on April 2 of that year, where the grandson of a plumber successfully reintroduced himself to WWE fans by securing a notable victory over Seth Rollins. This victory was just the beginning, as Cody would go on to defeat Seth Rollins twice more in the following months, firmly establishing himself as a main event force. In fact, Cody's success was further underlined when he won the 2023 Royal Rumble. Nonetheless, while fans still await the culmination of his journey with a WWE title win, the American Nightmare can take solace in the fact that he has proven his ability to be a long-term main event player. Not every journey to the main event has to be long-term. Occasionally, a brief flirtation with the top of the card can be sufficient for someone to prove their worth, as was the case with Brutus the Barber Beefcake in 1994. If you weren't following WCW in 1994, we wouldn't blame you, as it was a challenging period for the company. However, one aspect that worked in their favor was the influx of former WWF stars, including Hulk Hogan and Randy Savage, who were demonstrating that they still had something left in the tank. In the case of Hulk Hogan, performing at his best often meant having his friends by his side. This is how Ed Leslie, formerly known as Brutus Beefcake, ended up with a job in Atlanta. Was he considered a top-tier talent? Not really. Ed Leslie was primarily recognized as a comedy mid-card performer in WWF during the mid-80s. Nevertheless, that didn't matter much to Terry Bollea, Hulk Hogan, because he always sought to support his friends when needed. He managed to influence the situation so that, at Starrcade 1994, WCW's biggest annual event, instead of facing someone like Sting or Vader for the world title, he squared off against Brutus the Barber Beefcake. Yes, Ed Leslie can technically claim the status of a Starrcade main event participant, a fact that many still find difficult to believe to this day. However, whether you believe it or not, it indeed happened. Although this didn't lead to a sustained push for Ed Leslie, for one night, he could proudly say that he stood at the pinnacle of the wrestling world. He had the opportunity to face off against one of the biggest stars of his era, one-on-one, and do the job for him, in front of a packed crowd, of course. Despite the brevity of this stint in the main event scene, it's not the shortest we've come across. In a fleeting moment that lasted no more than a few minutes, Brian Kendrick found himself briefly holding the title of interim WWE champion. This was a surprising turn of events for a wrestler who had often been relegated to the role of a cruiserweight undercard performer in his WWE career. This moment of glory occurred in 2008 at the Unforgiven pay-per-view on September 7. Kendrick participated in a championship scramble match, where the unique rules dictated that, despite numerous title changes within a 20-minute time limit, only the individual who secured the final pinfall would be officially recognized as the winner. While Brian Kendrick isn't recorded in the annals of WWE history as a former champion, he does hold the distinction of being an interim champion. He achieved this status by executing his finisher on Jeff Hardy early in the match, covering him, and briefly holding the championship aloft. The on-screen graphic proudly displayed the Brian Kendrick, current WWE champion, marking a significant shift in his career. Prior to this, Kendrick's most notable achievement had been his tag team partnership with Paul London. Although his tenure as an interim champion didn't result in a sustained main event push, it remains a notable accomplishment, especially when compared to other cruiserweights of the same era. In the year 2000, Billy Kidman's moment in WCW had arrived, but to understand the significance of this, let's first rewind for context. Prior to his brief foray into the main event scene, Kidman was widely recognized for his immense talent. However, his relatively shorter stature led many to believe that he wouldn't ascend to the top of the card during the NWO era. Nevertheless, Kidman managed to carve out a niche for himself in Atlanta as a high-flying attraction, consistently delivering thrilling matches against the likes of Rey Mysterio, Juventud Guerrera, and Dean Malenko. While such a spot would have sufficed for some, it wasn't enough for Kidman, who hailed from New Haven. He persisted in pushing for a more substantial role on the show, a strategy that ultimately paid off in 2000 when Vince Russo introduced the New Blood storyline. It might seem far-fetched to suggest that anything good came out of WCW in 2000, but the angle had potential. The plan was to elevate several promising young stars, but to accomplish this, they needed to work with established legends. In Kidman's case, this meant sharing the ring with none other than Hulk Hogan himself. However, it wasn't just about standing across from Hogan. In a rare display of selflessness, Hogan actually put Kidman over on 3 separate occasions. Admittedly, these victories were somewhat unconventional, ensuring that fans knew who the true star was. Still, a win over Terry Bollea was a win, and Kidman seized this opportunity to the fullest. Unfortunately, his time in the main event spotlight was short-lived, mainly due to the impending demise of WCW less than a year later. As the company faced closure and many of its talents sought opportunities in New York under Vince McMahon, Kidman's chances of breaking through the glass ceiling were severely limited. Nonetheless, he can always take pride in the fact that he secured 3 victories over Hulk Hogan, a feat accomplished by very few. Our next wrestler might not share the accomplishment of beating Hulk Hogan 3 times, but he has a list of achievements to boast about. Despite beginning his wrestling journey from the bottom at the relatively mature age of 35, Diamond Dallas Page (DDP) emerged as one of WCW's most prominent homegrown stars by the turn of the millennium. It's a rare feat to find someone who achieved such heights in the wrestling ring at such a late stage in life. While you can make the case for Batista, who started in his 30s as well, becoming a huge star in mid-2000s WWE, even Big Dave's rise couldn't quite parallel what DDP was doing in the late 90s. Indeed, beyond Bill Goldberg, there were few individuals who began at the bottom of the wrestling card and organically climbed their way to the top as homegrown superstars during that era in Atlanta. DDP's ascent felt remarkably natural, never pushing him beyond his level of ability. Charisma played a significant role in his success. After all, he wasn't destined to remain in the undercard indefinitely. Some individuals are born to be main eventers, regardless of the hurdles in their path. In the 90s, DDP personified this spirit. While his success might not have reached the same heights when he transitioned to WWE in the early 2000s, recent years have shown that getting over in New York isn't the sole path to wrestling stardom, as talents like Kenny Omega, Will Ospreay, and MJF have demonstrated. Nevertheless, for many, the aspiration of reaching a main event position under Vince McMahon's guidance remains a prominent item on their wrestling bucket list before retirement. Starting out as a jobber in 2006, The Miz's desire to reach the pinnacle of success in wrestling grew stronger with time. During his debut year, when he was struggling to find his footing, few would have predicted that Mike Mizanin would eventually headline WrestleMania as the reigning world champion. However, in 2011, that's precisely what occurred. But how did he achieve this feat? Through sheer hard work, unwavering perseverance, and some clever strategies. Miz recognized early on that he wasn't the most skilled wrestler and that the fans were generally not behind him. In response, he made a strategic decision to lean into his strengths by crafting a conniving heel character that fans could passionately boo. If everyone was going to despise him, why not use it to his advantage? This became his mindset as he entered the late 2000s. His approach paid off remarkably well. After a surprising Money in the Bank victory in 2010, he cashed in the briefcase on a vulnerable Randy Orton during the November 22 episode of Raw that year, capturing his first WWE Championship. The move was widely loathed, but it served its purpose, generating significant heel heat for The Miz. This intense heat propelled him to the main event of WrestleMania 27 with the championship still around his waist. Facing John Cena at WrestleMania, most fans anticipated that the heel would lose the title and return to the mid-card. However, the outcome turned out to be quite different. In a genuine shocker, after an interference from The Rock, The Miz managed to secure the winning pinfall. This made him one of the rare heels to retain the championship on the grandest stage of them all. This victory solidified his position as someone who could always be inserted into a main event role thereafter. Another former mid-card wrestler who demonstrated his potential as a main eventer on SmackDown later that same year is Mark Henry. Despite once being legitimately the strongest man in the world, Mark Henry's WWE journey from 1996 to 2011 didn't seem to click the way many had hoped. By the end of the 2000s and the beginning of the new decade, most assumed he would remain a utility player, someone who could fill various roles as needed but not the focal point. Fortunately, everything changed during the summer of 2011. It was as if he had transformed into a different person overnight. Mark Henry adopted a menacing attitude and a desire to induct his opponents into his Hall of Pain. For the first time, it felt like Mark Henry could genuinely become a world champion, a sentiment he clearly shared. This newfound determination led him to set his sights on the top prize on SmackDown. On his path to the World Heavyweight Championship, Mark Henry left a trail of defeated opponents, including the likes of The Big Show, Vladimir Kozlov, and the Great Khali. The strategy was to eliminate all potential challengers so that when he finally faced the champion, Randy Orton, it would be a straightforward victory. This approach paid off as, on September 18 at Night of Champions, Mark Henry squared off against Randy Orton and emerged victorious, capturing the World Heavyweight title. With the fans now firmly behind him as a top-level star, Mark Henry's journey to the main event had been realized. However, it's important to note that sometimes, it's not a character centered on strength and brutality that propels someone from the undercard to the main event. Sometimes, a cerebral transformation is what propels a wrestler from the mid-card to the main event, and this is particularly evident in the case of Johnny Polo's evolution into Raven. If you were a fan of mid-90s WWF and your first exposure to Scott Levy was through his whiny, affluent character, primarily managing teams like the Quebecers and Atom Bomb, it's challenging to envision him as the same individual who later conceived one of the most compelling gimmicks of his era in the form of the moody and calculating Raven. In a remarkable 180-degree shift, after departing from New York and aligning with Paul Heyman's ECW, Levy was afforded the creative freedom to craft a character entirely distinct from Johnny Polo. This new persona was the ultimate grunge outcast. Unquestionably, for many wrestling enthusiasts of that time, Raven's character resonated with them on a profound level. As the weeks and months passed, Raven gained immense popularity to the extent that by 1996, he had clinched the ECW World Championship. While it may have been on a smaller stage compared to WWF, in the mid-90s, everyone recognized that the truly cool place to perform was in Philly. If you could get over there, it signified that you were indeed a superstar and had earned the right to be called a main eventer. Sadly, when Raven departed ECW and returned to both WWF and WCW, he soon discovered that these larger promotions held him back. Nevertheless, it doesn't diminish the fact that when it truly mattered, he successfully transcended jobber status and ascended to the main event, much like the other individuals we've discussed today.